Welcome to lecture number 12. Today's topic will be American expansion westward from the 1820s to 1850. Several themes will be included in this presentation. Essentially, it will focus on the American acquisition of Texas, the Oregon Territory, California, and the remainder of today's American Southwest. In some cases, this territory was acquired as a result of military conquest, but it also came about due to negotiation. The philosophy of manifest destiny and several personalities, such as Stephen Austin and James Polk, will also be explored. As this map and these statistics show, the United States was able to expand westward and acquire a vast amount of territory in an incredibly short period of time. Essentially, the goal of this presentation is to explain how the United States was able to acquire much of this territory so quickly. We can begin by discussing events which took place in what is now the state of Texas. The circled area on this map identifies a segment of the territory under the control of Mexico by the early 1820s following its independence from Spain. One of the problems the new nation of Mexico faced was the protection and maintenance of its borders. It's estimated approximately 3,000 illegal immigrants were living in Mexico in the early 1820s. Most of those illegal residents were from the United States. Here we see a depiction of the mission of San Gabriel, one of many such missions established by the Spanish in the Southwest. Missions like this one were key tools used originally by Spain to control their frontier. By the 18-teens, and particularly by the 1820s, the mission system began to decline, and the new Mexican government looked for new methods to control outlying settlements. Mexico's government responded by passing legislation to encourage settlement and put these illegal immigrants on the path toward Mexican citizenship. The new legislation was called the Mexican Colonization Law. The Mexican Colonization Law was passed in 1824, and it offered American immigrants a full league and labor of land if they met some requirements. First, they had to become Mexican citizens. Secondly, they had to obey Mexican law. This became controversial as by 1829, Mexico abolished slavery. Finally, these new migrants were expected to become Roman Catholic. What's a league and labor? Well, it was an awful lot of land. The league of 4,400 acres was for grazing livestock, and it was expected the labor of 170 acres would be used for growing crops. Many Americans took advantage of this offer as the terms were more generous than those available in the United States. Most established cotton plantations worked by slaves, as East Texas was seen by some as a frontier for the potential expansion of slavery. Probably the most successful American who became a Mexican citizen and encouraged families in the United States to travel to Mexico was this man, Stephen Austin. As an impresario, he led many American families into what is now Texas. Most Americans did not work directly with the Mexican government to obtain their land. Impresarios served as agents to facilitate the difficult task of transporting goods and supplies brought by the new immigrants to Mexico. Agents like Austin received large land grants in return for agreeing to settle a specified number of families. Austin and other impresarios were so successful that about 35,000 Americans had settled in Mexico by the mid-1830s. The name Texan was given to these Americans who relocated to and became citizens of Mexico. Most lived in the region of Mexico called Coahuila y Tejas. The circled area on this map identifies Coahuila y Tejas in what is now East Texas. While the Mexican colonization law was designed to assimilate Mexico's new inhabitants into loyal citizens, this never really occurred. Instead, the Texans continued to speak English rather than Spanish, and in general, they didn't abandon their Protestant faith for Catholicism. By the mid-1830s, tension developed between the Texans living in Mexico and the Mexican government. This eventually resulted in war. The objective of many Texans and Tejanos Spanish-speaking native Mexicans, of which there were about 3,000 to 4,000 in Texas, was to obtain greater autonomy for their province in Mexico. This goal countered the ideas of Mexican President Antonio López de Santa Anna, who implemented policies to limit the power of states. In 1835, Santa Anna's army was sent to Coahuila y Tejas to disperse the growing rebellion. This eventually led to the Texas War for Independence. The Texas War for Independence took place from 1835 to 36, and it involved Texans and some Tejanos fighting against the Mexican government. Sam Houston led the Texan armies. Many Americans from neighboring southern states became involved in the fighting, but the U.S. government did not. The specter of slavery's expansion made American involvement too controversial. The Texan rebels believed their fight against Mexico paralleled the American Revolution and carried into battle banners like this one depicting Lady Liberty. Santa Anna's forces were initially successful in this war. An early engagement took place at an old mission in San Antonio. The Battle of the Alamo involved about 5,000 Mexican forces against fewer than 200 Texans and Tejanos who refused to surrender. Remember the Alamo became the battle cry of many Texans in this war, as all who remained in the old mission were slain. Among the dead were famous Americans Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. For more information about the Alamo and the Texas War for Independence, you may click on the hyperlink below. Another important battle took place a few weeks later in March of 1836. At Goliad, Santa Anna himself called for the execution of over 350 Texan rebels, most of whom had just arrived from the United States. A final battle took place about a month later at San Jacinto, where the Texans gained revenge by catching Santa Anna by surprise. They forced him to sign a treaty while many Mexican forces were slaughtered. The new government in Mexico disavowed Santa Anna's treaty as he was forced to sign it under duress, but for all practical purposes, the Texans had won their independence on the field of battle. The Texans hoped to enter the Union, but once again the issue of slavery's expansion was raised, which prevented its entry. So, for about 10 years, Texas was its own nation, the Lone Star Republic. Sam Houston was elected its first president. This map identifies the boundaries of the Lone Star Republic. The Texans claimed the proper boundary of their republic was quite large and included the solid green section of the map circled here. Mexico's government maintained the proper boundary of Texas was limited. It was limited to the region farther east, with the Nueces River as a natural border. We can now explore a philosophy which influenced American expansion westward. It was known as manifest destiny. The concept of manifest destiny had actually been present for several decades in the United States. However, it truly gained momentum in the decade of the 1840s. Essentially, it was the belief that it was the nation's predetermined destiny that its borders should expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. The phrase manifest destiny was coined by New York journalist John L. O'Sullivan in 1845. He argued it was America's manifest destiny to overspread and possess the whole of the continent which Providence, meaning God, has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federative self-government entrusted to us. The justification for this unique destiny was that many believed the American system of democracy was so empowering to the people that of course the United States and its democratic virtues should spread to new areas. Critics have since argued not all benefited from this system, as African Americans were enslaved, Native Americans were removed from the land, and women did not have the same rights as men. However, this belief was still popular among many at the time. As the presidential election of 1844 drew near, one candidate made support for manifest destiny a key platform in his campaign. He was a relatively unknown candidate from Tennessee named James K. Polk. He promised that, should he win, he would acquire Oregon, Texas, and California for the United States. He would accomplish this goal in one term and then retire. Polk won the nomination of the Democratic Party in 1844, and political veteran Henry Clay was the Whig Party's nominee. In a very close election, during which Clay underestimated the popular support for manifest destiny, Polk secured a victory, as shown with this map on the right. riding the wave of manifest destiny. After the election and even before Polk assumed the presidency, Congress voted to annex Texas. Finally, by 1845, Texas had entered the Union. The banner shown here from the campaign shows an image of Polk surrounded by 25 stars, one for each state in the Union. Outside the corner box, a 26th star stood for Texas, which Polk had promised to acquire. As president, James Polk did more than just talk about manifest destiny, he put it into action. The first area where we see his activities in motion address his dealings with the British concerning Oregon. If you remember from a previous lecture, since 1819, the United States and Great Britain had agreed to jointly occupy the Oregon country. In the years following the agreement, the number of Americans living in the region increased dramatically, particularly in the fertile Willamette Valley south of the Columbia River, as shown with the arrow on the map. When Polk ran for office, one of his campaign slogans was 54-40 or fight. This was popular among some, as many Americans wanted to claim all of Oregon for the United States. The 54-40 of Polk's campaign referred to the latitude line 54 degrees 40 minutes, which is circled on this map. He argued that American claims extended up into portions of what are now Canada. While running for the presidency, he demanded the boundary be at the 54th parallel or he was willing to fight. He reiterated his support of this dividing line in his inaugural address, but privately he was willing to compromise. Eventually, this led to the Oregon Treaty, which was reached in 1846. The Oregon Treaty was important as it established the 49th parallel as the border between the United States and British territory, now Canada, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Secondly, it awarded the British control over all of Vancouver Island. Essentially, they simply extended the latitude line of 49 degrees to the Pacific, and even though the southern tip of Vancouver Island, shown with the arrow, fell below the 49th parallel, the British received the entire island. It was through diplomatic channels that the United States was able to receive independent control over Oregon. It would not be the same with American sovereignty over California and the rest of what is now the American Southwest. Polk had hoped to acquire California while avoiding war with Mexico. To accomplish this, he sent a diplomat with instructions to offer Mexico $25 million in return for the purchase of California and the New Mexico territories, as well as recognition of American sovereignty over all of Texas. The border Polk wanted recognized for Texas had its boundary at the Rio Grande River, which had always been a source of friction between the Lone Star Republic and the Mexican government. If the Rio Grande became the border, it would include a vast amount of territory, as seen with the red circle on this map. When Mexico rejected the American offer, officials there refused to even meet with the American diplomat, Polk decided to use the boundary dispute concerning the Texas border as an excuse to place pressure on Mexico to give in to American demands and possibly even provoke a war with Mexico. This is a close-up of the disputed area with Mexico. In January of 1846, Polk sent 4,000 American forces, led by General Zachary Taylor, into the disputed region in hopes that this would provoke a Mexican attack. His own diary shows that he expected some sort of a confrontation would take place soon. Just as Polk was about ready to ask for a declaration of war against Mexico, news reached Washington that American troops had been attacked. Soon thereafter, Congress declared war, and the war with Mexico had begun. The Mexican-American War lasted from 1846 to 1848. There were several key battles fought, and the peace treaty resulted in the American acquisition of a great deal of territory. Polk and his supporters welcomed war, while many in the United States opposed it. Some in Congress believed Polk had undermined congressional power to declare war by provoking Mexico and positioning American troops in Texas, while additional groups raised concerns over the possible expansion of slavery. Still others criticized this as a simple war of conquest, which violated American principles of democracy and freedom. This image shows American soldiers in Mexico during the war. One of the war's early heroes was Zachary Taylor. By September of 1846, his troops occupied Monterey, but were temporarily halted due to lack of supplies. In February of 1847, his troops were engaged in the Battle of Buena Vista. As they were severely outnumbered at Buena Vista, American troops fought hard. While the battle itself was a draw, the Americans forced Santa Anna, who had recently returned from exile, to retreat. Samuel Chamberlain, who was present at the battle, produced this drawing of the Battle of Buena Vista. Farther north, Stephen Kearny marched his forces all the way from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, to New Mexico and eventually secured Santa Fe without firing a shot, while John Fremont helped overthrow California by the summer of 1846. However, it was forces led by General Winfield Scott which occupied Mexico City by September of 1847. In the end, the war cost about 13,000 American lives. Many died on the field of battle, but still others died from disease. It also provided valuable experience for future generals such as Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. Furthermore, it caused a great deal of resentment among the people of Mexico toward the United States. For more information about the war and its battles, you may click on the hyperlink below. The treaty which ended the war was the Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo. Its terms were very generous toward the Americans. First, it determined the Rio Grande River would be the official border between Mexico and the United States. This close-up shows the border between Mexico and the United States. The arrow points to the Rio Grande River. By the terms of the treaty, the entire darkened area which had been under dispute was now unquestionably American soil. Another provision provided the Americans with a vast amount of territory. Not only did the United States acquire California, with its great ports in San Francisco and San Diego, but other states in the American Southwest also became part of the nation. Finally, in return, the United States paid Mexico a sum of $15 million. The circled area on this map indicates the territory acquired by the United States by the treaty in what was called the Mexican Cession. It included all, or parts of, California, Nevada, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo had its critics. Polk and others had hoped the United States would acquire all of Mexico. American troops did occupy Mexico City. However, probably the biggest obstacle for expansionists was pure and simple racism. The war was unpopular to begin with among many. Then, when others spoke of the racial impurity of the people living in Mexico, Polk relented and submitted the treaty to the Senate for its ratification. This presentation has addressed a great deal of information. Hopefully some review will help to reinforce the important concepts included. This lecture has addressed American expansion westward in the acquisition of Texas, Oregon, and the Southwest. In a relatively short period of time, the United States acquired a great deal of territory. Maybe the best idea to consider would be an evaluation of James Polk and the actions he took to acquire this territory. This slide was shown earlier in the presentation. Polk declared he wanted to acquire territory in the West, would do so in one term, and then retire. Well, guess what? He accomplished his goals and served only one term as president. He did what he said he would do. Some have argued Polk was a great American president because he was clear with his goals and he achieved them. However, critics have emphasized the tactics he used to achieve those goals and have not been so kind to his legacy. So, how would you evaluate Polk? Was he a great American president? Why? Why not? This concludes lecture number 12. The next few slides will include some hyperlinks to additional information and a list of some of the sources used for this presentation. I hope you learned something new today. Take care.